Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch, and I am your host. This week, we have another episode from the Surrender series, where I share with you the powerful teachings of the human story. This week, I get to sit with the amazing Prema Gaia that shares with us one of the most mind-blowing transformational stories I think I have ever heard. I found listening to Prema's story so moving. It moved me on so many levels. I cannot wait for you to hear this. Prema is a woman's leadership and business coach, meditation teacher, oracle, visionary writer, and plant spirit ceremonialist. Ceremonialist. But, she is like spirit incarnate. Prema used to work in Hollywood. She was surrounded by celebrities and materialism and just being famous and surrounded by fame. And she had the most profound download one day to give up all her possessions, to completely surrender this fantasy story and picture of a world and a life and a character that she felt she needed to be valued and worthy and to receive love in this world. And she let everything go. Prema shares her story in this episode about how she gave up every single material item she had and lived completely free of money for 2 years, while she also literally walked across countries with no money, no materialism, just following a calling of her soul. It is by far one of the most powerful stories I have ever heard. A story of trust, a story of deep listening, and a story of surrender. So I hope that you find this inspiring. Any aha moments, shifts in perception, insights that you get from listening to this, please do share with me. Write in the comments below the YouTube video, or write comments for me in my IG page, or write directly to me through my website, www.nikkiclinch.com. And if you want to buy my book and you haven't already, Surrender is now available all over the world, anywhere that sells books. And you can also buy a copy through my website, nikkiclinch.com. If you love this podcast, if you find this content that it serves you, please do leave me a review. Your reviews really matter and help this content spread far and wide. And please do subscribe to the Soul Surgery channel, because we want you here in our community. So thank you so much for listening. Over to the incredible story of Prema. Hi, Prema. How are you doing today?
Doing wonderfully. It's so great to be here with you.
It's really beautiful to sit opposite with you too. I know that we had to move this interview quite a few times. And I'm always really interested by that process, because there's something about it that's like life's going, no, this needs to happen now at this particular time. And when I'm sitting with you now, it's like, oh, yeah, actually, what I know that you are going to share with us, and what I'm really looking forward to diving into with you, this is the perfect time now for us to be having that conversation. So thank you for your patience and your commitment to being here. Um,
Mm,
I
thank you so
invited
much.
you to be part of the Surrender series. So my intention is to continually share with the listeners the power of the process of surrender, the transformational process of surrender, and the many, many layers in which that comes with the layer of breakdown, the layer of opening blind spots, the layer of surrendering the idea of yourself, and then the transformation. And I was so excited to have you on because I know that your life has just been this enormously transformational journey, hasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And surrender has been definitely a very, very deep theme in my life journey, in my spiritual awakening, and just, finding myself standing up, in the Himalaya mountains, just with my arms outstretched up to the heavens, just offering my entire life up to the divine and just saying, please guide me, please use me. And this has been something that has occurred so many times in my life. Every single morning it's, on my yoga mat and down on my knees in front of my altar in the space of surrender, asking Great Spirit to please use me for the greatest good. And that is what my path is devoted to, is to being in service during this time of paradigm shift and during this great global awakening that we're in right now. So it does feel like very aligned with the theme of the book, Surrender.
Mm, beautiful. So when I say to you, I wanted to invite you to speak about the greatest point, the biggest point, the kind of threshold point of surrender in your life, what came to mind for you?
Well, what comes up for me was my spiritual awakening in 2006, which I would love to share about. And
Yeah.
before getting into that, I feel like I just would like to backtrack and share a little bit about what led up to that,
Of course.
to that point, to that moment.
Hmm.
So, just to give a little bit of background on my journey, as I was a child growing up, I ended up incurring a lot of trauma. And at that time on my path, I didn't have tools and practices or self awareness or the wherewithal to navigate that pain and that trauma. And so, what ended up happening, by the time I turned 15 years old, I discovered alcohol. And then shortly after that, I discovered recreational drugs. And so basically the way that I describe it is my soul went underground for about 10 years. So I had a 10-year chapter of numbing and sedating my pain and my trauma through using substances and self-distraction and partying. And in that time in my life, when I was in my early 20s, I ended up moving to Los Angeles and I started working in entertainment industry. And it's interesting, showing up as a young, very impressionable young woman in Los Angeles with a deeply fragmented sense of self-worth.
Yes.
As you can imagine, it was a very interesting journey. So I ended up starting to get really involved in the Hollywood celebrity scene, club scene, and party scene. And so for about 2 years, I was going out about 5 nights a week to A-list celebrity clubs and hobnobbing with celebrities. And I ended up having experiences flying in private planes and living a very glamorous, fast-paced life. And it fed a part of me that really desired to have some sort of value and to have some sort of worth.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's so seductive.
It was very seductive, and it was something that it felt like it was feeding a deep hole inside of me, but ultimately it was something that was never going to deeply nourish me in the way that I was seeking to be nourished. And I was receiving validation and acknowledgement based on my appearance and not based on my soul or my gifts or my wisdom or my heart. So I did enjoy that lifestyle, and it was glamorous. It was fast paced. I was modeling in several different countries, and again, going to all these A-list events and getting backstage passes to everything. And at a certain point in time, I just started to discover that my behavior patterns were becoming alarmingly self-destructive.
Yes.
So, as I'm sure that many of our listeners can relate to, when you haven't done the deep inner work of unpacking the trauma, and when we're just living at that surface level and living that lifestyle, it's kind of like, it feels like a ticking time bomb where you just know inside your soul, this is not this is not going to last.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. So I had developed an obsessive relationship with food and exercise, as many women in the entertainment industry and modeling industry at that time were also had the same issue. And so sometimes I'd be exercising like 5 times a day and just under eating and, using alcohol and recreational drugs just to kind of keep everything on ice, so to speak.
Yes.
And yeah, eventually I ended up having the biggest turning point in my life was I ended up having a spiritual awakening where I was guided to give away all of my possessions till I only had the clothes on my back and start walking, and to go on a long walking pilgrimage of indeterminate length, just following my guidance, meeting spiritual teachers and wisdom holders and sages and shamans, and visiting intentional communities and ashrams. And so that was the biggest, I would say that was the biggest moment of my soul asking me to surrender to a higher plan in my entire life.
Yes. So I want to try and unpack this so that we get inside this, because that's just it's an amazing story, and I think it's so helpful for the listeners and for us to break down these quite common phrases that are used, like destructive behaviors, addiction, feeding this empty hole, and try to get inside of it. When you look back now, I mean, you spoke about trauma.
Yes.
And, trauma is not what happens, but what happens inside of us when
Exactly.
what happens. So when you look back with hindsight, in the most honest way that you can share with us, what was it that you were trying to fill or find?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I feel into that version of myself, that younger, impressionable, and version of myself that had not yet found self-love, and I
Yeah.
have such deep, deep compassion for her. I actually didn't discover my way home, back home to self-love, until I was 37 years old.
Yeah.
So just the notion of walking around on this planet for 37 years and not knowing how to love myself, it's just like the level of pain
Yes.
and grief of just,
Yes.
kind of pretending or doing my best to to make things work, but not knowing my lovability or my divinity whatsoever, not having access to it. Although I had read so many, by that point I had read so many spiritual texts. But I'll share more about my journey to finding self-love a little later. But to go back to your specific question, I remember that young girl, and how her thought process worked. I used to love showing my friends photographs of me with all of these celebrities, or at these
Yeah.
very high level events, or dressed up to the nines in
Yeah.
a modeling context, or just showing people my modeling portfolio. It was my one access point at that time to feeling like I had value. And
Yes, values. So you see, this is what's really important to catch, because this is just universal to human behavior and to human
mhm,
nature, the human condition. We can never have enough of what we never really wanted. You were seeking something. You weren't bad. You weren't sick. You were seeking something, but you were seeking for it in places that weren't going to give you that. So
yes.
inside the validation, because you speak about, I didn't have a connection to my self-love,
Mhm,
but really what that is an unworthiness. I am
mhm,
not worthy as I am.
mhm.
And so inside the validation, showing the pictures and that version of yourself,
Yeah.
what was it that she wanted?
Well, I wanted to feel like I had significance. I wanted to feel like
Yeah.
I was lovable. I wanted to feel
Hmm.
like I mattered. And on some level, I suppose I wanted to prove the people who had devalued me
Mm.
and shamed me.
Mm.
I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to somehow prove that I indeed was a valuable, worthy person. And not only that, but, look at me and all these amazing environments that I have found my way to, and all these doors that have opened for me. Surely I must have some kind of significance, or I must have some
Yes.
value to have gained access to all of these things that from my understanding and my conditioning, that would mean that I was successful.
Yes, and can you hear in that, and this is for the listeners as well, that your
Mhm.
life became about proving something that you're not, or
Yes.
overcompensating for something. Instead of being prima in the world,
Yeah.
your whole life became about trying to prove something.
Hmm.
And so you're not able to be you. You're like, the story of your unworthiness is living
Hmm.
your choices.
Exactly.
It's Wow, yeah, I mean, that's just in itself so important for
Hmm.
everyone to
Hmm.
hear, because that's what happens. That's what we all get caught in that, and then we call that our life, and we
Hmm.
think that's just who we are,
Hmm.
but then it never gets met. It's never enough, is it?
It's never enough. And, feeling back into that version of myself, I just have so much compassion for her. And I just want to just wrap
Oh,
my arms around her and look her deeply in the eyes and just let her know how worthy she is, that it is her birthright
yes.
to love herself and to cherish herself and to care for herself. And so basically, the awakening that I had, which was in 2006, it
Yeah.
came like a really loud, loud knock on the door from spirit. And up to that point in my life, I hadn't learned much about intuition. I hadn't learned much about inner guidance. I didn't even really barely know those words. So when this voice, the voice of my soul, started speaking more and more loudly, it was really confronting and very, very confusing. And the guidance was that everything you've built your life around to this point, which was 30 years to that point,
Mm.
was based on a grand illusion.
Ah,
And that I needed to start and rebuild from the ground up. And
wow.
that anything that I was holding on to from that time in the past was only anchoring me to samsara, or to illusion.
Yes.
And so
How
that
did that
was
come to you? How did that download come to you?
it was coming as inner guidance. So it was coming as inner guidance in my consciousness, which I had never had before. And I had never had training for accessing your higher self or accessing the wisdom of your soul. I had no training for it, nor did I have any context for it. So when it
Mm.
started happening, I was like, what's going on? Am I going crazy? This inner guidance is telling me that I need to start from scratch and create a whole new life, and to give away all of my possessions, because
Wow.
where I'm going, I won't need them. And so the biggest moment of surrender was after that. The guidance was coming in stronger and stronger. And at a certain point, I just realized, I was like, what do I have to lose? I was very unhappy. I was very unfulfilled. I knew I wasn't on the right path. I was on the path of trying to live out perhaps one of my parents' dreams, or society's dreams, or some of my friends' dreams, but it wasn't my purpose in incarnating on this planet. It wasn't why my soul chose to come here. It was far from it. So the turning point moment came when I just realized that I was a yes. I was going to follow the voice of my soul, even if it did not make sense to anyone except for me. I was going to surrender to my higher calling.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So that's a really courageous moment. And that in itself, there's kind of multiple steps that happen that I've started to notice. The moment before you're ready to give it all up,
Mm-hmm.
th- comes a moment of insight. It's a flash of insight. And it's actually a moment of humility to go, I can't, where we're willing to say, I can't do it this way anymore. Like, this
Yep.
isn't working. I don't know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and it's not working.
Yeah. Exactly. My plan wasn't working, and it was time to align myself with a higher plan for my life, to find
Yeah.
and listen and stumble towards the divine plan for my life. Even if I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, just to take one step towards it was a step in the direction of my destiny.
Yes. So, can you tell us? Like how did that actually look when you started to give up your possessions and
Yeah, it
like
was
what?
such an interesting journey, Nikki. So I had accumulated, 30 years of possessions. So what I ended up
Yeah.
doing was I ended up creating these free markets in a downtown area and laying all my stuff out on blankets and just my rollerblades, my stereo, my shoes, and just saying, you can take it. Just take anything you want.
Wow.
Take it. Hmm.
Oh, I feel so moved by that. That is
Yeah.
so moving to me.
And just the level of courage that needs to be summoned to do something like that. I just have so much empathy for that girl, because the calling
Yes.
was so strong and the pain was equally strong. And that was the motivator. I was like, what I'm doing is not working. I've got to start walking and I've got to find something else out. So I had two goals in my walking pilgrimage, which I ended up walking over 500 kilometers with no possessions, sleeping outside along the way, sleeping on back doorsteps of churches, sleeping on bales of hay, sleeping on picnic tables.
Wow.
I did, yeah.
So
It
you
was
sorry to kind of get inside this. So you
sure.
literally just you got rid of your physical possessions.
Hmm.
And just for the listeners, that's not just getting rid of your physical possessions. That's releasing all the
Yeah,
attachments that
exactly.
you had to who you are with those
Mhm.
possessions.
Yeah,
That stuff defines me. And you were
exactly.
releasing so much of your identity in that.
It was massive. In hindsight, I do feel that I made the right decision. I was releasing and putting old love letters in, recycling them. And I actually took my entire modeling portfolio, which was the one thing that I felt was my ticket to having some sort of value and some sort of self-worth. I took the entire thing and I dropped it in the recycling bin. And the entire thing that I'd worked so many years and put, these photo shoots, put so much love and care. And I actually went and deleted all of my modeling portfolio photos from my
Wow.
family's computer as well. My guidance was clear everything, start from scratch.
Yes.
And my father, my dear father, noticed what I was doing and he went and secretly went back into the hard drive and retrieved the photos because he was like, I know this is important for her now. I'm not going to tell her, but one day it will be important for her to have these photos. So he
Wow.
actually went back and retrieved them. So
That's such a parent thing to do.
yeah, thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad, if you're listening. And um, so I had two pieces of guidance were coming in really, really strongly from my soul as I was embarking on my vision quest. One was that I wanted to learn how to live off of the land. I wanted to find out if it's possible to live completely from growing your own food and wildcrafting food and living out basically in the wilderness. And if you could just live that way, I was like, I'm determined to find out if I can do that. And I
Mm.
went and I had a long journey with that, which I can share more about. The second factor that was guiding me was I knew from what I had read about the lives of saints and sages, which became something that I've studied very much, the lives of hundreds of saints and sages and masters and mystics from many different cultures. But what I knew was that there have been saints and sages on the planet, and this strikes a tender chord in my heart. There have been saints and sages on the planet in all cultures throughout history. So I felt to myself, there must be some sages and wisdom keepers on the planet now. And although I didn't have access to them in the world that I was living in at that time, I was like, Spirit, guide me, please guide me to those people so that I can
Wow.
learn and grow and receive the wisdom transmissions so that I can find a way. My devotion on my path became to find the way to liberate myself so that I could then support as many other people as possible in liberating themselves as well.
Okay. Wow.
Mhm.
So share with us. So you begin walking.
So I began,
You don't have much money, I
I
suspect.
actually, my guidance was actually to stop using money as part of my sadhana and as part of my sadhana, meaning my practice. So I gave away what little money I had left. And I actually lived moneyless for 7 months. So when I was on my walking pilgrimage, I was moneyless also. So I learned very quickly about this underground. This was in 2006. So I learned very quickly about this underground movement, which is called free culture. There's a large movement where there are people who are dumpster diving or collecting day old things from farmers markets and grocery stores. There are free markets where the entire market is filled with free things. There are free people have homes, especially in Portland, Oregon, and places like that, where there are free porches where you can just go to the porch and there's like a whole shop of free things. I would never have found out about this if I hadn't received that guidance to go moneyless. And so I walked for over 500 kilometers. At first, it was challenging. I walked from San Marcos, Texas, all the way across to Reynosa, Mexico. For anyone who feels like looking that up on a map, it was a long journey. I crossed the border at Reynosa, Mexico on New Year's in 2007. And along the journey, the most, and in Texas, it was in miles. So the most miles I ever walked in one day was 30. That's a lot.
That is
And
a lot.
it's a lot. And so
Wow.
the first part of the pilgrimage was challenging because my legs were hurting so much. But then eventually I got used to it and I found my stride. And when it came time, like at night, I would just ask Spirit to guide me where to sleep. And I would find somewhere, often outside. I would find somewhere that felt really safe. And I feel like I was always protected and always surrounded by angels and guides. And I felt like I was very safe. And the interesting thing is, on the walking pilgrimage, I was actually having these incredible Satori moments and these amazing experiences. And I was very, very joyful. I felt amazing. I was like, wow, this is working. This is incredible. And then when I arrived at one town, I met a woman who I would describe as long lost soul family. And she ended up inviting me to her house, and we were just downloading with each other for like 2 days. It was so beautiful. And she introduced me to a whole bunch of people who, it was the first time in my life where I was recognized for who I am at soul level. And that is the most rewarding feeling that you can possibly have when you've never had that before. So one of the people just had tears in his eyes, and he was like, oh my goodness, this new era is here, and I'm so glad you've come, and I've missed you, and thank you for showing up, and thank you for coming. It brings tears. And just the
Yes.
level of authentic joy that they had in hearing what I was doing, that I was on a walking pilgrimage, that I was following my guidance, and that I was going around and meeting different spiritual teachers and sages and going to intentional communities. People were really inspired by the journey. I'm still in touch with some of the people that I met on my walking pilgrimage to this day, actually. And so in certain towns, people would invite me into their homes, and they would feed me and even give me massage once in a while, and just love me up and just be so curious about what I was doing.
Yeah.
So I ended up.
I just
Go
want to
ahead.
say before you go on, I'm having a really, really visceral experience to hearing you speak, because it's so moving to me, and it's like remembering something that I've always known that we have forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
That hearing you speak about, in releasing all that material possession, the
Yes.
identity, you allowed yourself to start listening once again to the land, to the
Yeah.
elements, to
Mm-hmm.
spirit, to something deep within you. I'm remembering how we once lived here, the
Mm-hmm.
indigenous cultures, learning from the plants,
Yes.
from the trees, from nature, walking through the desert. This is a wisdom that
Mm-hmm.
is ingrained in our being that
Mm-hmm.
we have disconnected from
Mm-hmm.
because of all the stuff that we think is who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I'm
Absolutely.
I'm so moved by hearing
Mm.
this.
Thank you so much. And I feel when I discovered you and your body of work, I felt this profound soul recognition. I was like, oh my gosh, there she is. Hallelujah, my sister.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Amazing. So I feel very similar, and I have full chills up my up my arms and my legs right now as I speak. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight is this was the first time in my life that people had been able to see me for who I truly was, because I had peeled so many layers of the facade, or the social masks that we all wear. So by releasing those, people were actually able to finally see me for who I truly am. And so
Yes.
it was just such the most meaningful and significant and rewarding experiences that I had ever had up until that time in my life. I was crying tears of joy as I was walking, crying, just elated tears of like, oh, it all makes sense, and
Wow.
all this, just these Satori experiences where I felt like my third eye was just spontaneously opening and I was just able to see things in a whole different way.
Hmm.
And so from that point, I ended up hitchhiking over 20,000 miles
Wow.
across Mexico, Canada, and the United States, going to, for example, I would go hitchhike thousands of miles to go see Amma. Then I would go hitchhike thousands of miles to go hear different teachers like Sri Ma, or these different wisdom holders, even like Jack Cornfield and A.H. Almas and all these different teachers. I would go listen to them speak and hitchhike, and then I would hitchhike to the Kundalini Yoga Summer Solstice Sadhana celebration in New Mexico, and just hitchhiking all around, asking people who are the most inspiring visionary teachers you've ever met in your life, and then I would go hitchhike and meet them. And where are the most inspiring evolutionary communities that you've ever come across? And I would go and go to those communities. I would sometimes go to places like, for example, Christ in the Desert Monastery. I would go do a retreat there. I would go do retreats in these different in these different temples, Tibetan Buddhist temples and ashrams all over the place. And the most amazing thing was that when I would arrive there and let people know what I was doing, that I was guided to live moneyless, and that I was hitchhiking everywhere, dumpster diving, and sleeping outside, and visiting different wisdom holders, people would really embrace me with open arms. And for example, I was the only student in the whole Kundalini Yoga Summer Solstice Sadhana celebration to receive a full scholarship. It was such an honor. And
Wow.
just so many doors opened up for me at that time. And then eventually it came time to ground down and to settle. And I ended up settling in New Mexico, and I met a wonderful mystic teacher whom I adore. His name is Wind Boone. And he actually, to this day, he lives out in a debris hut in the Gila wilderness. He became one of my greatest mentors, and he taught me how to live off of the land and how to wildcraft food. He taught me all about the
Oh,
wild edible plants. He taught me about the stars. He taught me about making bags out of plant fiber. He taught me, he was doing things like making pottery over an open fire, making water vessels out of all different things. It was, and just so extraordinary. And he still, to this day, he doesn't interact with society. He doesn't use technology. I don't know if he knows what Facebook is. He's not interested in talking about it. So he's one of my greatest mentors, and he welcomed me in and taught me everything and didn't ask for anything. And so he was the one who empowered me, because my great guidance was that it's part of my destiny to do long solo retreats, either in caves or in the forest. So my friend Wind empowered me on how to do that. So I had the opportunity to do a 20-day solo retreat in
wow.
his mud hut in northern New Mexico. So I did a 20-day solo retreat out there. And then the following year, I did a 20-day solo retreat in the Gila wilderness, which, for those who haven't heard of the Gila wilderness, it's a huge, beautiful piece of land that has never been bought or sold in the history of this planet. And you can actually still see arrowheads from when indigenous people used to live there. You can still see pottery shards. You can still see all these artifacts out there,
Wow.
because it's dry enough that those things haven't eroded. It's extraordinary. So one of Wynn's friends packed up 2 donkeys and took me deep out into the Gila wilderness. Well, one donkey had food and provisions, and one donkey we rode, and we went deep out into the Gila. And he dropped me off in a place in the Gila wilderness where I wouldn't see another person, hear another hear a voice where there was just nothing but me in the wilderness. And it was like, when I got out there, I was like, this is my destiny. I always knew that I was meant to do this. I always knew it.
Yes.
And it was my destiny because my path in this lifetime has been to find my connection, my direct connection to source, and to reestablish my direct link to source, and to empower and support other people in doing the same. And for people to know that it is our birthright to have direct access to source without the intermediary of a priest or a lama or a rabbi. We all have that direct access. And I was determined to tune in and find my own way back home to source, to my soul, to my guidance. And so when the 20 days was over in the Gila, I packed up my backpack and I hiked out. I hiked out of the wilderness when I was ready. And then after that, well, I'll pause there, but there's more to share after that.
I have an
I'm sure you
amazing
can imagine.
I have an amazing question to ask you, and I think it'll help a lot of people listening. And it keeps coming to me as I'm listening to you. I'm like, I have to ask you this. I have to ask you this. So in all of this, you know, you
Yes.
speak about it because you did it. You speak about it like it's so possible. You know, you just faced it and you did it. But let's not deny how much courage this takes, what you have done and what you did. Now, because you're still human, even though you're guided divinely by
Yes.
source, you
Mm-hmm.
know, can you share with me, like, what happened with the fear? Because there must have
Yeah.
been moments of such fear. Because what I'm hearing is that you were facing, you came face to face with your mortality as well, to be able
Yes.
to like every day, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to step out of what we think we need in order to survive this life and come face to face with it and challenge that and question it every single day. You come face to face with death
Mm-hmm.
and your mortality. So can you share with us about how you how you what happened for you around your relationship with fear, around your relationship with death?
Yes. Yes, I absolutely can. That's a powerful question. So, with regards to being out in the wilderness, when I first started doing my solo forest retreats, because I started by doing short ones for like a day, 3 days, and I started familiarizing myself with the wild animals and developing relationships with the wild animals, like
Oh,
the bears, for example. I love bears. I'm talking about black bears. The only places I did retreats were in black bear country. They weren't in grizzly bear country, but I developed a really beautiful relationship with the bears, and my mentors just explained to me how to interact with the animals, which is one of the most empowering things that I've ever experienced in my life, is learning how to be with the wild animals that are considered dangerous. So I was around so many wild animals out in the wilderness, wild javelinas, these boars with these sharp teeth. As a matter of fact, here in Costa Rica, I see them on a regular basis where I live now as well. But different, bighorn sheep and bears, and surely there was wild cats and bobcats, mountain lions. They were out there. I didn't ever actually physically see them, but they were there. But I learned something something that's deeply held um, in my own self-awareness now, is when I'm out in the wilderness in a space of peace and in a space of being out there in connection to the unified field, in connection with all of life, I really, really feel safe. I really feel safe. I don't feel that the wild animals would attack me or harm me. That's just something, it's a deeply held, felt sense inside of me that I'm in communication with the
yeah.
animals, and I just learned how to interact with them so many times that I don't feel I don't feel threatened by wild animals now. But the other question around death. So this one, to answer that question, I'll answer it really vulnerably, and I'll answer it from a very tender space. And that is that in some of these times on my journey, I was just in such a space of surrender and also in so much emotional pain still at that
Yeah.
time on my path that I was like, Spirit, I am here following you. If it's my time to go, I trust that. And now the way that I would phrase that at this point is very different because I am here on this planet 100% committed to being in service. And I feel very deeply now that I will be on this planet for a long time. I feel
Yeah.
that Spirit has poured a lot into me and has invested a lot into me, and that I will be here in service for. I believe I'll have a long life. But at that time, I was just in such a tender place. I was just offering it all up to God and just trusting, putting my life in God's hands. And yeah,
I
so
mean, really, that's the ultimate freedom. That's the point of liberation because, you so much of human suffering comes from our fear of death,
mhm,
from our fear of any version of death, the ultimate death, as
yeah,
which no one really knows what that is, by the way.
mhm,
No one really knows what happens when we pass over.
mhm,
Um, and and when you remove that fear,
mhm,
and you're in full acceptance and at peace with, it could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be now. Th- what that opens up in your
mhm,
relationship to life is everything.
mhm. And there's a couple of pieces that I felt really called to share as well, which is, I guess, the biggest piece is as I was, well, I didn't mention a couple of details from the journey. One of them was that I ended up shaving my head and joining a Buddhist meditation community for a while and doing a lot of spiritual practices and meditation and qigong and a lot of different spiritual practices. But during that, so I was living basically like a self-directed renunciant path for about 4 or 5 years.
Hmm.
But during that time, what feels really important to share, I was studying different scriptures, studying the world's wisdom traditions.
Hmm.
And during that time, what I didn't realize for part of that section of my journey was that I was on some level of spiritual bypass and I hadn't actually done some of the deeper work of the emotional healing and the emotional integration, which is completely, a necessary, inextricable ingredient if someone is called into soulful
Hmm.
leadership or heart guided leadership, heart guided entrepreneurship, which is the path that I'm on now. It's an inextricable component to that journey is doing the deep healing work necessary to come
Yeah.
into the highest level of alignment and congruency that we can so that we can serve from a clear space. So
Yes.
when I received the call to come back into busy urban life, that was in late 2012, and I was actually quite hesitant to come back into the busy
Of
urban life. I
course.
was guided to come back to Los Angeles, and I was like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. I was like, this is the last thing I would have ever expected. At that point, I still had, my hair was just growing out from being shaved. I was, I was still so internally focused on my relationship with spirit all the time. And I had grown to love that lifestyle of being out in New Mexico and being so close to nature. And so when
Hmm.
I was guided to come back into busy urban life and start studying leadership and coaching and entrepreneurship, well, the guidance was really strong. So I followed it. And since that time, 2012, I've been on that path of
Yeah.
first studying leadership and entrepreneurship and coaching, and then eventually becoming a guide. But the one piece that I want to highlight is what I personally feel is it's so important to emphasize is there came a time in my life a few years ago where it became really clear that in order to be able to serve at the level that I feel so passionate about doing, I needed to first go, and I ended up joining a healing school program for a year and doing the deep, deep emotional healing and integration work. I joined a school called the Luminous Awareness Institute, which is a wonderful school. And that after I finished that school, my life started working at a level that it had never worked at
Yeah.
before.
Yes, I'm so grateful that you brought that up because I mean, I agree completely. There's these, we can hit certain points of awakening and liberation on a spiritual realm, but at the end of the day, we're human. And
Totally.
the ultimate liberation is, can we be human and free, and can we speak from that place of liberation in human form? That's I often have these moments. I have so many, I've had so many moments of such complete liberation
Yeah.
and freedom. And
Hmm.
then, and I'll go, well, gosh, why would I want to leave here? Like, why can't I just go and sit in the rainforest and just be with the trees? Like, they know,
Totally.
the trees know how to be. I'm happy here.
Yeah.
But I always hear the same guidance, Nikki. It is your work to go back into the marketplace, and your work is to be in the marketplace. And that's what I call it. That's what I call life, is the marketplace. We go back in and we have to bump up against each other. And that's really where the work begins. Like, how
Hmm.
much freedom can we be in and speak
Hmm.
from while we're in the marketplace?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that feels very similar to my own path again as well. And so going to the healing school was such an important experience, and just having the opportunity actually to cry all of those tears that I had been carrying around for so long, and to be witnessed by, well, there was a cohort of 100 other students in the healing school, and they would witness me in my most vulnerable, terrified, speaking
Mm,
about, anxiety or fear. I would be witnessed in certain places inside of myself that hadn't seen the light of day in like over 30 years. Like, there was parts of me that would surface in that safe container that literally I had tucked away for decades. And I remember moments where I would be sitting with my pod, because we were all broken up into these groups called pods, and they would be witnessing me talking about something extremely, deeply, deeply vulnerable. And there were moments where there was a part of me, a certain part of me, a very vulnerable part, that would say to me that it would rather die than be witnessed in that much terror and in
yes.
that much fear and in that much vulnerability. And it was real survival energies coming up
Mhm.
when, I was first letting myself be witnessed in those same places that had catalyzed me to spend 10 years of my life self-sedating.
Yes.
10
Yes.
years of my life self-sedating. There's something in there that obviously needs to be unpacked,
And
eventually.
that's why I wanted to start by asking what was in there. At the beginning of my book, because I have a very similar path. I went down addiction, and I was lost in addiction, heavily in addiction, for a decade of my life, and I got clean at 20, and
Wow.
that's young, but I really was on death's door. And I write
Mhm.
in the book, and I say really clearly, it wasn't the drugs or the bulimia or the alcohol that was going to kill me. It was the absolute crippling low self-worth. That
Yeah.
was what was killing my soul.
Mhm.
And that is the point that is so important to capture, because eventually that is the part that we need to come back to and to dive deep enough to be with. And when you talk about that deeper work, it's how much can we how much can we be with the shame? How much
Mhm.
can we be with the parts of ourselves, the human reactions and experiences within ourselves, and to be there with compassion and love,
Mhm.
and to allow ourselves to be witnessed in that place? Because when
Yeah.
we can, it's hard work, but when we
Yes.
can, that changes you forever. And it changes the way that we can be with each other. Somehow, if we can be with our own shame, then it gives me the capacity to be with you while you're in yours.
100%. 100%. Yeah. It sounds like it could be easy, and it's extraordinary how hard it is. It's like it can be some of the especially when you're in the middle of it, and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're just deeply entrenched in the shame, and like finding your self-love in those moments. So, to circle back to something I shared about the finding my self-love, the conditioning and the imprinting in my consciousness was so thick. It was really fascinating to unpack it. So the process of unpacking that, it was quite a journey. And so I ended up doing a plant spirit medicine ceremony, which by working with the sacred plants, they were able to kind of go inside of my consciousness and whisper inside of me messages that showed me how lovable I was, how worthy I was. And it was like the plant spirit medicines were shining a spotlight on different beautiful moments in my life where I had been on my knees offering my life to spirit, or shining the light on just showing me my devotion, showing me my courage, showing me my commitment. And it was because the conditioning and the imprinting they were so thick. The only thing that worked for me to get through that was the plant spirit medicine. And I was in a ceremony with a bunch of incredible people who were reflecting back to me my worth, my beauty, my value, my gifts, reflecting to me that I'm an oracle, that I'm a channel. And it was such an interesting experience, because in that moment, there was a part of me that was saying, wait a second, you mean I've been carrying this story for 37 freaking years, and it's never for 1 second been true?
Yeah.
Like, it just is so mind-boggling. It really required a lot for me to get around that, to wrap my mind around that. How could that be? This has been my reality for 37 years, and you're telling me that I'm actually a beautiful soul, that I'm actually here as a light on this planet? What? And it was just so, wrapping my mind around that really took some doing. And it was the only thing that could chip away that deeply was the plant spirit medicine, because I could have gone to counseling and therapy for 10 years and it still wouldn't have gone through into those depths of my psyche in the way that the plant spirit medicine does. So it's not for everyone, obviously, but it was one of the biggest catalysts. It was the catalyst that finally helped me find my self-love. That plus the integration, and that plus the sacred reflections of all the other people who were in that container with me, just reflecting back who I actually am. And what a mind-boggling experience to really let that land for you. That basically what we internalized, the painful projections of hurt people, that we internalized as something is wrong with me. And however long we carried that, and my prayer is that people won't have to carry it as long these days. And I believe that, it's a powerful time on the planet right now, a time of great awakening and great healing. And we're all here as mirrors for each other. And my prayer is perhaps someone will hear this podcast and it will help them and benefit them to really question any limiting stories or imprints that they may have taken on in childhood, and just really question whether those are 100% accurate, or maybe it's a good opportunity to reevaluate that.
Yes. I mean, that is literally what my entire book is about. It's, I speak about how, we're like a frog in a well, but we don't know that we're in the well. We think that's our world. But the well is the story that has defined and we have been attached and identified with of who we think we are. And until we can't see the walls, we just think that's our world and that's reality. And we are in this extraordinary time now where there is sages and wisdom teachers were talking about this decades and decades ago. They were talking about this time
Definitely.
that we're living in now. And what comes with awakening is a phase of destruction. First, the destruction. Something must die. Something needs to dissolve. Something needs to be challenged. The blind spots need to be shaken up. So it's not an easy, comfortable journey, but my goodness, and nobody can live it for you. That's that's the important part. There's nothing that you and I can say that will still deny someone from having to have the lived experience of living through their process and waking up.
Exactly.
Let's hope we can inspire them and give them courage, and give them identification. They're not alone. But and this is the part that I think is the gift. You have to be the one that does it. You are the only one that has the power to live through it yourself and wake up yourself. And that in itself is so empowering, and that challenges the whole conditioning anyway, that something out there is more powerful than you are. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, I mean, I'm just so moved. And there's so much in your story, and not just your story, in your courage and your commitment to listening to something greater and living that. Prima, this has been a gift that's on so many levels to everybody that's going to listen to this. There's so many things in here that are just going to be light bulbs and light bulbs. So I guess what the one thing I want to finish off by asking you is, where you are now, having
Hmm.
lived this, what is your vision? What is your vision in the world?
Yeah, I love that question. So, where I am now in my life is I'm the founder of a movement called the Soulful Women Entrepreneurs Convergence. So, I believe that I believe and I've seen that soulful entrepreneurs are thriving in these times post COVID more than they ever, at a higher level than they ever have in their lives. And that's certainly true for me. And it's true for so many people my colleagues and my friends and my clients. And so I believe that we are in the paradigm shift right now that we incarnated for. This is it. This time that we're in. We came here for this time. We signed up for this, and this is an extraordinary opportunity to bring forward our soul gifts and our sacred work. I believe that everyone has a piece of the puzzle to play in this great global awakening and healing, to co-create a world that is more equitable and harmonious and kind and sustainable for all of us. And so that is my passion, is to be in service to that, to support my clients and the people who participate in the groups that I lead in stepping into sharing their sacred work in the world and opening their voices and communicating from their souls and from their authentic selves, and finding the ways to get their work out into the world on a larger scale, so that the people who are seeking that support and that guidance can really access it. So I lead groups of women entrepreneurs through masterminds, soul aligned and soul guided masterminds, and I have a group that's coming up called the Soulful Women Entrepreneurs Convergence, which you can check out the link to that in the show notes,
Yeah.
soulfulwomenentrepreneurs.com. And I just feel very, very passionate about these times. I truly believe that this, although it seems very dynamic and very tumultuous at the surface level, for sure, I actually believe that it's falling apart so that it can fall back together. And as I've been having conversations with so many soul guided leaders and entrepreneurs and visionaries, what I've heard from so many people is that they're thriving at the highest level of their lives right now. And it's like, the more that we do the deep inner work to bring ourselves into integrity and into congruency to be able to serve our sacred work, I feel like these times are actually, it's so many old systems and structures that weren't serving are falling down rapidly. And there's this whole new field that we get to plant the seeds that we've been holding and guarding with so much devotion for so many years. We get to plant those seeds of our soul gifts and our dharma and our sacred work. We get to plant those seeds in the fertile soils. And it's almost like, I live in Costa Rica now. It's a great metaphor when you plant seeds in the soils here in Costa Rica, and it's the rainforest where I live, and those seeds are going to grow very, very quickly, and they're going to be rich
Yeah.
and beautiful. It's like, so it's a great metaphor for what's happening right now on the planet. It's like there's open field, so many of us that chose to be here at these times. We have these seeds we've been holding on to, protecting and taking such good care of, and it's time to plant those seeds and
Yeah.
let them nourish and uplift so many other people as well.
Mm. I love you. I just do. I'm so grateful that we were brought into each other's worlds. And I'm extremely moved by meeting you and knowing you and hearing your journey. Yeah, I just thank you. Thank you so much for your service and for your gift in the world, and for being such a stand for something so much greater. It's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Prima, for sharing your story with
Thank
us.
you. Thank you, Nikki. I love you too. And I'm so, so grateful for the work you're doing. You're such an inspiration to myself and to so many people. So deeply honoring you for shining your light so brightly. And thank you to everyone listening. I would love to hear from you. If you felt inspired, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at prema.gaia. And just so, so grateful for this opportunity to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.